Who do these beings claim to be when they communicate with people? 4 explanations we've come across. And this depends largely on where a person is at and what they are willing to receive. Satan comes as an angel of light. If you open yourself up to the occult, he's going to study you and know what you are most inclined to believe, and then he's going to approach you from that angle. To people involved in pantheistic belief, who would therefore also believe in reincarnation, most frequently, if they're in touch with spirit guides, they would believe that these are former human beings who once walked the earth, who have gone through numerous reincarnations, and now as a result they have become so highly evolved that they can communicate to us in ways that we cannot yet comprehend. That's their explanation. Of course, if you believe in reincarnation and pantheism, that sounds logical. That's what they buy into. Some people also believe that someday they might be able to be a spirit guide and help govern the progress of the planet. If you are not spiritually oriented, if you are an atheist or a humanist, but you have dabbled perhaps with self-hypnosis, and without realizing it, therefore opened yourself up to the realm of the occult, and suddenly you have an experience that you cannot explain with this being that you see in a type of visionary trance state, more than likely the explanation you would be willing to accept is that this is a being from another world, an extraterrestrial, that is more highly evolved than we are and therefore can communicate to us in ways that we cannot yet understand. I'm willing to tell you tonight, put myself on the line, that it is not a coincidence that 1 out of 3 films coming out today that's a hit deals with the theme of extraterrestrials. I have a friend who was a film producer, a Christian, for many years. He just got out of it about 2 years ago. And he said that he knew for a fact, and he named some of the film producers by name, who made it a requirement for people to serve on their creative development of the movies to be involved in some form of occult meditation. And these people are then involved in producing these films. Have you ever wondered how anybody could have such a vivid imagination to even come up with some of this stuff? I believe some of this is literally coming across from the realm of the occult, and these people are simply putting in motion what they're seeing and what they're receiving from these beings. In fact, some might even be willing to go that far to admit that, as it's becoming quite open. A third explanation for the existence of these beings, and this one would affect people mainly that would come from a Catholic background. If they've dabbled with the occult and opened themselves up, more than likely they would believe that these beings are either patron saints or possibly even Mary appearing to them. But if you talk to people with some of these experiences, they share a lot of the same details that these other people do that think they saw extraterrestrials or spirit guides. And if you come from a Protestant background, this is the fourth category, more than likely you will believe that these beings are angels. And this is really caught on now. You go to any bookstore, even some Christian bookstores now have New Age occultic teachings regarding angels. You have to be careful if you buy a book on angels that it's scriptural. We know of a person out in Colorado that grew up in a Christian home and came onto a conference that was there in town being held, a New Age conference. They went and they became convinced that we can, all of us, can get in touch with our angels anytime we want to, and that we have different angels guarding over different areas of our lives, and all we have to do is go into an altered state of consciousness to summon these angels, and they'll communicate to us. And what they didn't realize they were doing was they were opening themselves up to the realm of the occult. But what a deception. And you know, they may be angels, but they're fallen angels, so it's a half-truth. But people are buying into it because they come across so benevolent in many instances. How can these beings be summoned? Can they just appear to anybody at any time? Well, I've already tipped you off. Going into an altered state of consciousness opens up the gateway to the occult. That's what people need to understand. Because that is a form of spiritism. This is strictly forbidden throughout Scripture. People today don't really understand what spiritism is, so when they read a verse in the Bible, they might not even realize that they're operating in the realm of the occult necessarily. That's why it's so important for pastors of churches in our day and age to explain to people what the occult is so people know what to avoid so that they don't naively slip into it. Maybe the best way I can describe altered states of consciousness to you and how this works is as follows. I believe that every person, when they are born, has a type of protective shield, invisible as it may be, that God has placed over them to shield them from the realm of the occult. But if people persist, there are techniques that they can employ and use to tap through that protective shield and get directly involved in the occult. And some of these techniques and teachings are literally thousands of years old and go back to ancient Egypt and Babylon. Others are derivatives of those teachings. They've been modified to appeal to modern society more, but it's the same old stuff. And there are many different ways of achieving an altered state of consciousness. On page 37 of my book, The New World Religion, I have a chart, a levels of consciousness chart, that shows you how this works in a pictorial fashion. A normal alert state of consciousness is the beta phase, which I hope I'm in right now as I'm sharing with you. But when you go into an altered state of consciousness, the first level achieved is the alpha state. And that's where people begin to have these experiences, and that's the most common state. However, some of the most advanced yogis and swamis from India, they can go all the way up to the omega state, where your brainwave activity almost comes to a complete stop. If they were examined at that point in time, somebody might literally rule them to be dead. They can almost bring their bodies to a stop, to a standstill, through these various meditation techniques. Now, what are some of the occult practices I'm talking about here that can be used to achieve an altered state of consciousness that open people up to the occult? One of the most popular ones, perhaps the most popular one, is yoga. I'm sure all of us know people practicing yoga. You can practice yoga at many YMCAs. I've known of people who become Christians at a local church and that following week go to the Y and practice yoga. And they're opening themselves up to the occult. Some of you may have heard recently, and I believe it is true, that Jane Fonda has become a Christian. We've checked into that some, and as best as we can determine, I believe that has taken place. However, I also understand, I've been told, and I have not been able to check this out, that she's still teaching yoga. She probably doesn't realize that, and we need to pray for her and others. But at least they're moving in the right direction. But if you've been involved in this stuff, it takes a while to find out what is not of God. And some people, even 2 or 3 years afterwards, are amazed what they have to let go of because they didn't realize they were involved in something that is occultic. Again, it's very deceptive. Yoga is passed off as an exercise, and there can be some exercise benefits to it, but it's a spiritual exercise first and foremost, and you need to recognize that. Transcendental meditation is the other area. Of course, this became popular back in the 1950s, and millions of people in the United States are now practicing TM. These ideas, both of them, yoga and TM, came right out of what? The Eastern religions. This was the first pantheistic invasion aimed at the public masses in the United States to get us off course. In the mid-1800s, I doubt they would have gotten very far. But as we got into the 60s, all of this just exploded. The groundwork had been laid and things were ripe. Contemplative prayer is another one, depending what you mean by that. This is something being practiced more and more in Catholic as well as Protestant circles. It really incorporates some of the principles of Buddhism in it. And it's almost like a form of practicing Buddhism in the name of Christ. So you need to be aware of that. It's another import from the Far East. Mind dynamics, which include flotation tanks, among other devices. Are all of you familiar with flotation tanks? A few of you are. For those of you who aren't, you go into a room, most big cities have at least a few places that have flotation tanks. It's like a casket with water in it. And the water is heated to body temperature. You get in there, you take all your clothes off first, get in there, and within a short time in there, you feel like you're suspended because it's exactly your body temperature. It's as if you're just floating in space. And it's pitch black in there. They close it up, and then they pipe in New Age music to help you relax. And it's all aimed at helping you to achieve an altered state of consciousness. Parapsychology, including all forms of clairvoyance and other psychic phenomena, tie into this as well. Trans-channeling. You have these channelers going into an altered state. And some people attending the meetings or seances don't necessarily go into an altered state, but they're still participating in this. And that brings me to another point I need to slip in here. Along with these altered states of consciousness, the other main area of the occult is ritual magic. So you can invoke occult deities without going into an altered state by going through certain rituals, some of them quite old and going way back in time. So those are the two chief methods of opening up the gateway to the occult. Okay, now moving on, I want to talk a little bit about hypnosis. There are many, many people who have been hypnotized in this country at one time or another. I had a friend who was a psychologist. He practiced hypnosis. He was a Christian. He did no better at the time. In fact, he was my youth leader for a while growing up in church years ago. And since then, I found out he's completely let go of this because he realizes now how wrong this is. But it's passed off as a science, and that is how it is taught in most of our universities today. So people don't realize this is not a science. It's dealing with spiritual matters. It's amazing to me that the main treatment for multiple personality syndrome is to put people into altered states of consciousness, to hypnotize them, which only opens them up further. That is not the solution. You've probably seen specials by, I think it was 2020 that did one a year or two ago. Don't quote me on that, but it was one of the major evening news magazines. And they showed how these people go through treatments that involved putting them into an altered state of consciousness. And it just isn't going to work in the long term because it's only opening people up more and more. Now, an area that may surprise people, might not. Well, before I go on to this next category, let me share one example of hypnosis, how powerful it is. My wife's niece, who lived in Bern, Indiana, and went to the high school there a few years back, shared a story with us. A hypnotist, a renowned hypnotist, came to her high school and was allowed to put on a demonstration there. And this man called up about a half a dozen kids or so and decided certain ones of them he'd be able to hypnotize and others he would not be able to for whatever reason, so he sent them back to their seats. Perhaps they were the strongest Christians of the bunch, I don't know, but probably so. And then he proceeded to hypnotize these kids. I believe they were juniors in high school at the time. And once they were under, he had them do all kinds of silly things. He had them get, one of them, he had get on their hands and knees on the platform on the stage and walk around on all fours, barking like a dog and making all kinds of animal sounds. And the kids, of course, thought it was great. They were laughing hysterically. And then he brought that person out of their trance, and they had little or no recollection of what took place. And then he did something else with another person, and so on, and entertained this crowd for some time. Well, about a year or so later, the same hypnotist came back to the same school. And without any warning, without having talked to any of the kids he had hypnotized a year earlier, he spoke what is called the trigger word. And these kids, wherever they were sitting in the audience, immediately slumped over in their seats and went into a trance. This was 1 year later with no warning. And you cannot tell me there's no power in the occult. Now, he went on to explain that he used his powers for good reasons, for good causes. But that's like saying that white magic is okay, but black magic isn't. It's both from the realm of the occult. And we cannot allow ourselves as Christians to be drawn into these areas and open ourselves up to the occult. But many people are doing so. Another area I want to focus on briefly is mind-altering drugs. LSD, heroin, various mind-altering drugs can help achieve an altered state of consciousness. In fact, similar drugs were used by the ancient philosophers in ancient Greece. We have this documented to help them achieve altered states of consciousness way back then, at which time they would see various spirit apparitions appear to them, and this was part of their rituals in their initiation. It's true. Nothing new under the sun. It's the same old stuff presented in different ways. It's no of Satan's deception. Virtual reality is now being employed to help achieve an altered state of consciousness. I was flying United Airlines several years ago, and in their magazine, they were promoting a form of virtual reality. It's called Zen meditation. And what I got from reading the description is that you put these visors on, and then lights will flash at a synchronized rate inside. You'll see them inside the glasses. And just by staring into these glasses for 5 or 10 minutes, it'll put you into a trance. So they're coming up with all kinds of high-tech ways now of achieving altered states to make it easier and easier Silva mind control. Millions of Americans have gone through Silva mind control, which also uses various imaginary vision techniques and focusing techniques to achieve an altered state of consciousness. And then you have your stress management seminars. Some of them also introduce people into this areas, and the list goes on. Martial arts, you need to be careful with that too, because some of those ideas have come from the East, and some of the concentration techniques are very close in line with achieving an altered state if you carry it far enough. So it kind of puts you on that track, although not necessarily all the way into it. But I caution people about that, because many Christians are involved in the martial arts in the various forms. In fact, you know, something interesting, if you look up the term ninja in your encyclopedia, you know what ninjas were? Ancient occult warrior priests in ancient Japan known for their occult powers. And that's just the starting point. If you really study the roots of the martial arts and where they came from, there's a spiritual tie-in, a very strong spiritual tie-in. It's more than just wrestling or boxing. There's a spiritual connection there. So just look into it on your own as you have time, and I think you'll come to agree with me on that. Well, I think we've covered that area as thoroughly as we can with the time that we have. If all of these ideas are going to affect us in the last days, occult concepts, pantheistic thinking, this spiritual deception, there are indications in the Bible that this would be worldwide and that it would be part of this end-time global government system. So how can all these religious beliefs be pulled together into a type of world religion or worship system that would prop up this world government? Well, a lot of organizing has gone into that in the last 50 years, especially since World War II. We have seen since World War II a growing number of ecumenical and interfaith activities worldwide. I'll take you through just a few of them, and this is an oversimplification again. But really, in the post-World War II era, the World Council of Churches played a significant role in getting the ball rolling toward this false sense of unity. And it started out, it looked good at first until you began to study their statements. And right from the beginning, they made clear that their purpose was to help create the religious atmosphere for achieving a new world order. And that's actually in some of their opening statements, references to the new world order and the likes. Somehow, professing Christians had to be brought together into a type of false unity if it was to go any further. If you could somehow unite Christians in thinking by getting them to compromise various beliefs and somehow getting them all together through the World Council of Churches, then, perhaps then, you could take Christianity the next step and try to blend it in with the other world religions. So it's a step-by-step process. And we have seen that in process over the last 50 years, as I've mentioned.